So like every guy born in the 70s, I like Star Wars and Lego, especially Star Wars Lego. So when I were indoors, the light of my life bought me this ultimate Collectors Series Millennium Falcon one Christmas. I knew she was a keeper. So this video is going to be twofold. Building this and an epoxy river shell for it to go on. Hi, I'm Rich and this is Triple Dog Workshop. So I'm going to use these two bits of oak and some epoxy to build a shelf while I build this. So while he cracks on with that, we'll have a look at this. So these are two bits of oak that I've had lying around for a while now, for something I just never got around to. So first things first. They are a bit big. We are going to have to take a bit off either side to make sure we get the shelf the size that we want. They're also a bit thick, so we are going to have to plane them down to the right thickness. The other challenge is that my planer only has a very narrow entry and exit, and these are big heavy pieces of wood. We're going to be asking that planer to do a lot. Let's see how we get on.
So first up is to measure the wood so I can get the shelf the size that I want, but the wood's small enough to fit through the planer. Once I've done that, I can cut it to size.
Right, so it's now time to flatten these bad boys, because they have obviously a bit of a rock on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them onto this piece of chipboard, which we know is flat. Hot glue it around the edges to keep it in one place. Probably put some wedges in some gaps so we don't get any push down, and then feed it through the planer. Before we start feeding this through, just a bit of a word of warning.
I got a bad feeling about this.
These things can be incredibly dangerous. The slightest wrong move, you're going to lose a finger. They terrify me. So if you're going to use one of these, use your loaf. Now that I've got the top flat, I can run it through the planer this way and get both slabs down to the thickness that I want. The UK is in the middle of a heat wave. This is going to be very messy and noisy, and I've got some serious crack juice.
This is madness.
So that's them all planed to size now. I've taken roughly about 10mm off each one, and as you can see, it's made quite the mess. So, quick clean up, and we're on to the next stage. So next up is to build a mould or a form, whatever you want to call it, to put the slabs in to enable me to pour the epoxy. I'm going to make that out of some offcuts of this chipboard, or melamine as it's sometimes called, and put it together with some screws, some glue and some caulk. Now the important thing with this is we don't want the epoxy to leak at all. So that's the form done. Hopefully it won't leak, but only time will tell. But before we pour the actual epoxy, there's a couple more stages that we need to do. 1.
Seal the live edges of the wood with some fast drying epoxy.
2.
Scuff up that dried epoxy so you get a better bond with the main epoxy pour.
3.
Paint some shellac on the top of the wood, that will help prevent the epoxy staining the top.
4. Like, subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. 5.
Give the mould a liberal spraying of mould release, that will help you get the project out of the mould once it's dry.
I'm now ready to do the epoxy pour, which is both the exciting bit and the nerve-wracking bit. You might have noticed that I've put tape all the way around the edges of the form. This is to help to prevent any leaks. Now you might consider that belt and braces, but I'm of the opinion that it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Having done this before, if there's a chance that resin will leak, it finds a way. And resin's quite expensive. This project's going to cost me roughly about 200 quid. So it really is in my best interest to ensure that the resin stays in the form and doesn't find its way onto the floor. So I'm going to use this Epodex Pro Epoxy resin. I'll leave a link in the description of where you can get it, and I'll be adding this white pigment to it. Now I've actually used this stuff before when I made my dining room table, and I was really happy with the results. And as for cost, it's there or thereabouts when it comes to epoxy resin, so I'm going with what I know. The other advantage of this, it's a deep pour resin, which means I can do it all in one go rather than have to do a number of different pours.
Now I can't stress enough the importance of getting your mixture right. If you don't get the percentages right between resin and hardener, you run the risk of it not setting properly and ruining your project, not to mention wasting an awful lot of money. This is not like baking a cake, this is science, and it has to be exact. So follow the instructions and mix it well.
So once you've mixed your epoxy, you can pour it into the form, but for God's sake, whatever you do, don't, under any circumstances.
Richard?
Yeah,
Can you take a look at this?
sure.
It was always my intention to submerge the wood in the epoxy. It's got an awful lot of burr on the top of this wood, so I want the epoxy to go down all those little holes.
Day 5 since the epoxy pour, and it has cured. So, next up, get out of the mould, router off the top, sort out any imperfections, and then sand, sand and sand again. So this mould release that's supposed to make it easy to get the thing out of the mould is rubbish.
So to get both sides of the shelf flat and even, I've knocked up this router sled. Now it does make a mess, however it does the job, and once I've got both sides to where I want them to be, I can move on to the sanding process. So I like to scribe the top with a pencil so I don't miss any bits. And then going through the grits from 160 to 600, I take a pass on both sides of the shelf. So now we're ready for the finish. Using a polishing pad that I can use on my orbital sander, I can then work this through. Once it's all done, wipe off the excess and let it dry. When it's dry, Give it a once over with some 600 grit and then repeat the process. And we're done. And this has turned out really well. I'm very pleased with this. Just got to get it on the wall now. I hope the other guys finished the Lego. Okay, so that's a wrap. We're all done. I'm really pleased with how this has turned out, and I think it sits up there quite nicely. The stand it is on is from a company called Wicked Brick, and I'll leave a link in the description for you if you want to go and find that. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, maybe consider subscribing. Right, what's next?